Testing 1, 2, 3. Testing 1, 2, 3.
Hi. I don't know if anyone's there. It was my daughter trying to steal jelly beans. Let me turn this around. We'll wait a minute or two before we get started. I think it's 5:30. It's about 5:30.
5:30.
Okay, it's 5:30. We'll wait just a couple minutes or two. Daddy. That's Sonia.
And this is me.
And that's Alon. And the videographer today is Karen. And that's Alon. So we'll see how this goes. The kids are amped up on sugar. Alon. Alon. And we're going to start off where we started, where we left off last week. We're down in this valley right now, kind of sheltered from the winds. The windstorm is starting to get here. And you can see the tops of the trees starting to move with the wind.
And it's also time to be with everyone.
It's time to be with everyone, that's right. So I think we're gonna get started right now.
Yep. Yeah, we want to beat the windstorm.
And so I'll turn this around. I'm Neil Pederson. We're starting here in a part of Maynard, near where we left off last time. I'm a forest ecologist with the Harvard Forest. Today I'm representative of the Maynard Tree Corps, a new organization to preserve and grow the forests of Maynard, especially in streets and yards. We have a web page, we have an Instagram feed, we have a Facebook page, and now we have a YouTube page. So these videos are going to go up on YouTube. The first two are up right now. Today's hike will be 30 minutes. I set my timer for 6 o'clock Eastern time, and we'll stop when that happens. I'm not sure how many trees we're going to get to today, because we actually got quite a bit the first 2 days. We got 16 total species so far, but I want to start here today. I'm going to turn this back around. And I'm not sure, you can see that red dot in the background. That's a house on the other end of this trail. And in between here and there, we have the red maple swamp that we started in, essentially. And then the area that we went between that and here, this oak upland forest, is what we did last time. Last time we focused on white oak, and I wanted to start on this tree because these bald patches right here are really, to me, really beautiful. You can see both types of bark on white oak right here with this tree. And the bald patches here are representative of slightly slower growth. They could be as representative of old age, but they're representative of slow growth. I wanted to start here because we're going to do a lot more landscape ecology than trees, again, because we've seen a lot so far. But what you're looking up is the trail. But if you see how flattened it is in respect to the hill, this is an old road down to the river. When we finish these episodes, we're going to end up where there used to be a pond, a mill pond, and they used to make gunpowder there. What you're looking at right here, this green right here, this is skunk cabbage. And I wanted to start here because it's really come up in the last week or two since we were last here. And what you'll notice is it seems very patchy, but what it actually represents is where there's moisture in the soil. So Alon and Sonia are walking down this dead stem, and where that patch going off to the right of skunk cabbage is, that's a seep, or an area where the groundwater breaks to the surface of the soil and creates a slightly wetter area. So that's like a temporary wetland, because where Alon is right now, he's waving to you, is drier over there. And then if you look straight down here, you'll see a line trailing off into the distance of skunk cabbage. And that's where there's another like little seep down to the stream that goes down to the Espet River. All right, so let's get started. I'll hand this off to Karen and we'll make our way down the trail. Come on, Sonia.
Alon, go help her. Go help her. Go help her.
So what we see right here is a nice oak forest, and I wanted to point out this tree right here. This dead tree, this snag. This is a black oak. It has the classic black oak, blocky, dark bark on it. But if you pan around the other way, you'll see that there's a lot of dead trees. There's one across the trail down from us. There's another dead snag, that's a red maple over there. There's another dead snag over here. So what you can see by looking at these is that we are in a maturing forest. I won't exactly call it a mature forest, but it's definitely a maturing forest. If you recall, or you can go back and look at the first two episodes that we did, we found the stone wall at the beginning of the second episode, and that showed that this used to be, down below here used to be an old pasture of some kind, and I estimated that maybe 50, 60 years ago, something like that. The trees are a lot bigger here, and you might like this red oak right here, the large tree right there.
Whoa!
It's a really large tree. That large tree. So, but red oak is one of the fastest growing trees in the forest, and that size of that tree doesn't really represent age.
Yep.
But down here,
We have money.
down here we have a big tip up. This looks like a black oak again. There's the root ball there that came up. I believe this came up probably in the March 2018 ice wind storm that we had. And someone thankfully cut at least one of the stems down. And from this we can get a sense of this forest history. So this is one of my specialties, using tree rings to understand the history of the forest. And what you can see right here, maybe you can zoom in, is that there are very wide rings here, and the rings get smaller here. And that's a very natural pattern of rings of trees that are growing in the open and growing fast. Now we're about 20 feet up this tree, and so this tree could have sat in the understory and grown very slowly for quite a while before it got to here, but by the time it was 20 feet tall at least, it was growing pretty quickly, which means this was an open landscape. I did a quick count on these rings earlier in the week, and this tree is about 90 years old at this height, about 20 feet above the ground, and I would estimate that it took 10, 15 years, maybe more, maybe less, to get to this height. And so I think this tree was established probably 120 years ago at maximum. So we have big trees in here. We have some maturing trees. They're falling down from the windstorms, but when you start seeing more trees like this dead pine right here, that's a white pine that's dead, standing. I can see the bark on the bottom, but just looking at the wood tells me it's a white pine. When you see more and more dead trees in the forest, you're getting into a mature forest, a maturing forest. I don't think 120 years is very old for a tree or for a forest, but that's my bias. Hold on a second. Sonia, alone! All right, come with us! Or not. All right, let's keep going. So this is a forest that's getting some age, and it's showing signs of maturation. All this dead wood and these dead trees are really good for the habitat. The trees, when they tip up and they turn over the soil, they're mixing the soil. They're sitting on the landscape like this. They're like a slow release fertilizer. And that's a woodpecker, which is one of my favorite birds. And woodpeckers love dead wood or snags and dying trees because there's lots of insects that they can pour into and feed off of. I'm not identifying any trees yet because we've seen all of these species and there's nothing too unusual about these individuals. I will point out some other individuals that do have slightly different traits than what we talked about. But you can see a lot of trees came down in this forest. Go get your sister. Oh, there she is. All right, let's just go. And I like this kind of habitat.
Where's go get some?
When I see dead snags and down trees, then I know it's a really rich forest in terms of its history. It's becoming more diverse. The older trees or the larger trees are falling over. New regeneration will come up. And when I started doing my dissertation work, when I heard a pileated woodpecker, then I knew I was in an old forest. It was like an old friend telling me, here you are, you've arrived to this old forest. And later on in one of these later episodes, we'll find evidence for a pileated woodpecker, but just up the hill from here, you can't see it quite from here, but there's a large wolf tree up the hill. I saw 3 pileated woodpeckers chattering at each other on the same tree. And so we had seen them here, flying over our house, and we had heard them. But these are the kind of woods they like. It's not old growth, but it's maturing, and it's got the diversity of living and dead trees that help sustain them. So here's our first new tree. I'm going to record this. This is pignut hickory. I was just reading up on it a little bit ago, and it's also called, an old name for it was called broom hickory. It was used for brooms. Hickory is made because of its durability and this type of wood structure that it has. It's really good for axe handles and shovels and things like that. So I identified this as pignut hickory because it has the ridges and furrows that we talked about. They're fairly tight together on this individual. And if you look really closely, these ridges are sharp. They're really angular. It's really rough to your hands. And so this is one of these species where I've looked at it a lot in the last decade or so. Sonia didn't go into the river, almost did. And this is just one I've learned. This light gray color kind of stands out for pignut hickory, but we're going to go ahead because we're going to see it again, and we're going to see one of its closest neighbors that it resembles in terms of that. But this is pignut hickory, and we'll talk about more characteristics of this species. In the summer, when it has its leaves, you can identify it because you can look at the rachis, or the stem that holds the leaves, and they'll be smooth with no hair, and that's one of the best ways to identify pignut. There's a couple other ways, but that's a good way. Yeah, I see some other trees. We'll see along the trail. Sonia, come on, come with us.
Hold on, go get her.
So, a deer.
Go get her. Go get her.
Sonia, I have your phone.
And this area is really interesting. We were on oak, almost a pure oak upland forest over that way, and now we're actually just upslope. There's a lot of hickories here. And here's another hickory right here. This again is pignut hickory. And that tight weaving of the ridges and furrows, if you pan this way now, so that's pignut hickory. Now pan around. And you see some tight ridging of some furrows. Here, this is white ash. And so they kind of resemble each other, but white ash has more of a brown tone in the bark, and pignut hickory is gray. Here's a really nice young sugar maple bark. Really classic. The bark peels off to the side of the tree this way. So this is a review. And if you look down here, it's like a light sugar. Light, like brown sugar, like light brown sugar color. And that's how I identify sugar maple in the winter. We have a cherry tree right here. I'm going to want to call it a fire or pin cherry. This is a hard one for me to identify. Personally, I know people can identify like this, and that banding that you see right here on the bark helps identify it as a cherry. These are lenticels. And that spacing, quiet, the spacing of the lenticels makes me think it's more of a fire or pin cherry. We're going to add it to the list because it's here all over the place. I just can't positively identify it. Right? No, there's nothing. All right. Now this is a spot we're going to spend a good bit of time again. Again, here we have pignut hickory.
Oh, God.
That's so funny. Anyway, she did what she said she was going to do. So this is pignut hickory. You can see the ridges, tight ridges and furrows, and very sharp edges. So this is pignut hickory. Now if you pan over here, this is mockernut hickory, also called, I read it was also called, it was also called white hickory. But mockernut is what we go by now generally, and it's Caria tomentosa. And if you could find the rachis, the stem that holds the leaves, it'll be very hairy. And that's tomentosa, which is the species name for this one. It means hairy. And that's how one way you tell these two apart. But by bark, you'll see that this bark, here are the ridges and furrows, but they're not as sharp. And if you zoom up right here, they're not as sharp as they were on pignut hickory. And the way I remember mockernut hickory, and we'll see some younger ones up ahead, this is a bigger one anyways, is it looks like the bark was cast in metal.
She threw her phone.
I know. Will you go get her? Away from the river. And so the furrows, it looks like the bark was cast in metal and then it underwent a partial molt. A melt, I should say. Not molt. It's not molting, it's melting. And underwent a partial melt. And so the edges of the furrows look a little more rounder than pignut hickory. And that's the main way I tell these two apart at this age. When they get big, when mockernut gets big like this, there's a blackness to the bark. And that's another way I identify it. The blackness of the bark, the rounding of the furrows. And if you pan all the way up on this tree, it's going to be hard to see on the phone, but and then pan all the way up so we get to the pignut hickory, all the way up. Yeah. And so that tree that you see in the upper right corner is actually pignut hickory, and then the tree in the center is mockernut hickory. And the way I tell these two apart, if I have to go to this level, which I don't have to go to this level, mockernut hickory has thicker twigs, really stout twigs. And pignut hickory is finer twigs. Now, and that's really a subtle thing that will come with time. There are other hickories that you could confuse these two, but the other way I like to identify the hickories from other species by looking at their crowns like this is if you look at the ends of the twigs, and it's going to be hard with the camera, with the phone, but when you get out in the forest, or if we could be together, someday we'll be together and be able to do this. The ends of the twigs of hickories look more like an older hand, someone with arthritis, severe arthritis. So it looks like so I think of the end of the twigs of hickory look like this. They look like an older arthritic hand. And I don't know of any other genera, any other types of trees other than hickory that look like this in the eastern United States, quite like this. It's very rigid, And it looks like an old arthritic hand. And so that's how I identify hickories from other species in the winter. And then the difference between pignut right here, you can see again how sharp that bark is compared to the mockernut hickory, which is generally smooth, is the density of the twigs, but also the stoutness of the twigs. And that's probably enough for this one right now.
Wow. Termites.
You found termites?
Yeah.
That's awesome. We're going to keep going. This is a nice black oak right here. And I think I passed it, but I told you that everyone writes on American beech trees. You can always identify them because there's always graffiti, whether it's carved or now spray painted apparently. This is a nice patch of black oak right there. Another black oak. We're going to come to this tree again. This is going to be a lot of repeating now, probably for the rest of our time here. This is another hickory, and you can see that the ridges are actually quite, oh, there goes a heron too. The ridges here are really rounded. Again, it was, to me, the way I remember it, it was metal. It underwent a partial melt, so the edges of the ridges are nice and smooth compared to pignut hickory. But there's also a light blue-gray cast to this, and not on the north side of the tree, but if we come over here to this side of the tree, it's more of a steel blue, light blue gray in the color of this mockernut hickory. And that's another way I sort of tease this tree out from the other hickory. And it's really interesting that mockernut hickories here, we're really near the northeast range margin of the species. It doesn't go much farther north. It doesn't go much farther, east, up in the eastern Massachusetts. And so this is really a southern species in south central, well, it doesn't get up quite up to the south central New England, but up in the eastern Massachusetts. And I was really surprised to see this because this is not a common tree species in a lot of places I've been. But it's here, and what I've noticed here in Maynard is that if you go up to Summerhill, the preserve up on the green space up on Summerhill, there's a lot of mockernut in there, which I was really surprised to see. The water tower in Acton, near the Discovery Center Science Museum, there's a lot of mockernut there. And so when I see mockernut now, it makes me think about when I used to see it in New York State on top of the Palisades, on top of basalt. And basalt is rich in cations and micronutrients that give a more positive pH to the soil. It doesn't have to be, not above 7, but more than the more acidic soils that we live on usually. And so, much like we talked about last time in the other part of the forest where we saw black oak, white ash, and sugar maple, I talked about being more calcified soils, a richer soil. And when I see mockernut, that just tells me more of the same. This is a richer soil, a good place to grow crops that would need more micronutrients.
Yeah.
That's right, Sonia. And so here's another hickory. So this is really a cool grove of hickory here. These ridges are sharper, so I would place this more in the pignut hickory category. Again, this one is too. If you could feel this is really almost sharp, these furrows. So pignut hickory there. There should be more hickories here. There could be a bitternut hickory which grows on richer soils. I've not seen it yet, but I'll keep looking. That's a young white ash, by the way. And there could be shagbark hickory here, but I've not seen shagbark hickory yet. And so now we're entering a part of the forest where I see a lot more a lot more birds, a lot more active birds in here, usually on sunnier days in the morning. And I think, did we talk about white pine yet? I think we did. We did talk about white pine the first day, but I didn't record it. So we're going to just record it now, so now we know it. This large tree right here, and this is a good one to review anyways. We did talk about it the first day, but this is a beautiful large white pine. I'll go up next to it so you can see how big the stem is. It's a fairly large tree, getting close to 1 meter in diameter, maybe 3 feet in diameter, and it's the second tallest tree in eastern North America. And if you look up at, if you pan up to this tree again, however, you'll notice, maybe you won't, but it looks like very thin in terms of its foliage. It's not very dense foliage. There's a disease or several diseases going through our white pine in this region right now. Needle disease complex, and I wouldn't be surprised if this tree had it because its crown looks awfully thin. White pine are dying off a little bit here, but there's a nice mixture of species in here. Oh, see that hawk? So I don't know if that's the hawk that I saw a few days ago, but we saw Cooper's hawk just sitting here, and we're starting to enter the mill pond part of this trail, and then we've seen bald eagles and mute. Is the alarm going off? The alarm was supposed to go off. What time is it?
On my phone, it's almost 5. It's almost 6.
Okay. And so this is a really rich part of the forest in terms of wildlife. I don't know my birds so well. I only know the obvious ones. Like there's a white-tailed hawk or a bald eagle that lives here. It's a bald eagle. It's a joke. But I want to show you this again. We're going to repeat this. This is mockernut hickory. There's a bluish tinge in the bark color, but it's got this black down in the furrows. And so this is really a rich set of woods in here. This is a black oak that's fallen into the river, preserves probably all kinds of good habitat. It looks like it had a good bit of root rot, heart rot at the base of this tree. I should say heart rot. This is a very flaky red maple here. Black oaks up in this forest. So, and I think this will be a good place to end for now. It's about 6 o'clock. And so we only got 4 confirmed species here, but that's because we had 16 already to begin with. And we'll start off here next time. Maybe it'll be a few days because I want to get down. There's some really cool species up ahead when it gets a little bit wetter. But if you have any questions, drop them down in the comments section. I'll answer when I can. I'll tell you the trees we've seen, and I'll put in links to our YouTube page so you can watch the other videos. Have a good evening. Stay well.